Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thanks to my Delaware colleague, Senator Coons. Thank you for being here. I'm interested in all of this topic. I'm particularly interested in Chinese influence in the Americas. I have maintained during my now 12-plus years here under presidents of both parties and under Senates controlled by both parties that we don't spend enough time or attention in the military space through Southcom or in the foreign assistance space. We're not focusing enough in the Americas. And China sees that as a huge opportunity area for them. And my other colleagues who travel in the Americas, we see this all the time. Investments in Panama, offers of, 5G systems to nations like Costa Rica. And we appropriately warn allies in the region about the dangers of these. And we usually hear the same thing. Yeah, we understand, but do you guys have anything on the table for us? And what we tend to say then is we kind of diplomatically stumble over our tongues because we don't really invest. I'm very nervous about a recent statement of President Trump's reported last week. We don't need Latin America. That was widely reported. And then the foreign aid pause last week, which didn't just affect programs in Latin America, it affected them everywhere. But even setting those things aside, talk a little bit about what you're seeing in terms of Chinese influence in the Americas and how worried we ought to be about it.
So the Americas is currently our primary battleground with Beijing. China sees our weaknesses there. They see an opening. They're showing up across the hemisphere. I think the recent port opened in Peru is a perfect example. When we show up, we win. And one example, I would like to thank Congress and this committee for authorizing and appropriating the CHIPS Act, which included $500 million for the State Department to show up in Latin America and elsewhere and partner with nations to support U.S.-based semiconductor manufacturing.
And just to use as an example, there was a CHIPS plant in Costa Rica that had closed, relocated to China, but it is now back up and running in Costa Rica. And the CHIPS portion of the CHIPS Act that involved incentives for allied nations to produce chips near shore, if not onshore, was a factor in that decision.
And I would also like to add that that was a factor in Costa Rica saying no to Huawei and going with Western alternatives, because you cannot be a CHIPS recipient and have Huawei as your 5G provider. I'm quite confident that this committee would rule as such. And I would be remiss in my duty if I didn't add there is a substantial amount of counter PRC malign influence activities across the hemisphere that is currently frozen.
Please, Dr. Lind.
Thanks so much. It's a really important question and important to remind us of how vital the Latin American region is and is going to be in coming years. We are in a superpower competition. And we remember the last superpower competition that we were in, the number of times that the United States was engaged in various activities in Latin America, the number of times the Soviets were. I mean, think about the Cuban Missile Crisis, right? So just the fact that we are in a superpower competition again should cue us to be thinking that Latin America, South America is going to play a much larger role. I would say that China in particular is already, from its perspective, it sees the United States as very much operating in its backyard. And we have bases there, we have strong alliances, we have US military flowing throughout the region and so on. So China has the perception that it wants to push the US out, and a very keen way to do that, a very clever way to do that, is to start pressuring us in our backyard, as indeed it's already doing.
What's the Chinese assessment of our response? I mean, they are pushing in our backyard, but to me it doesn't look like we're really responding in a forceful way. Is that how China sees it?
I couldn't tell you how China sees it, unfortunately, but I think that when China looks at our efforts, it sees both a very powerful adversary, capable, technologically advanced, and adversary that has tremendous assets around the globe and tremendous goodwill across the globe and in the region that we're talking about in many ways. So China sees that. but it also sees vulnerabilities. And the vulnerabilities are many of which we've been pointing out today. And the vulnerability of the pause in foreign aid, for example, that's a...
Or refusal to confirm ambassadors in the region. These are all kind of part of a fabric. My time is over, so I yield back, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Senator Scott.
Sure. Thank you, Chairman.